How are you doing, Margaret?
And to Scott's job description, light pedestal. Okay, we are on the record. Thanks everyone for coming to this work session on the first day of spring. Yay! It's the first day of spring. And you know, I noticed that we even had to have the shades down because it's so light and nice outside, and to keep us, I guess, focused inside so that we don't just stare out the windows on these beautiful days, which this might be the last one of for a while. But anyway, Peter Pastorelli, our Public Works Director, is here to talk to us about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, popularly known, and you've probably seen a lot of press about this, as PFAS. And if you haven't seen the movie Dark Waters, you should find it online and watch it.
Well, thank you, Mayor Beatty. I am Peter Pastorelli, Public Works Director, and as the Mayor said, I'm here to talk about PFAS. 30 minutes, there's a lot to talk about.
Well, we have a little padding this time because our next item is definitely not going to take an hour.
Yep.
So,
okay.
So you have what time you need.
So what I would like to do is sort of give you just a brief summary, some of the bullet points up front, and then sort of follow up with some of the detail. We'll talk about what PFAS is, some of its chemical characteristics, and the regulatory environment, what it means to Milwaukie, what it's going to mean to Milwaukie, and sort of what our potential next steps are. As the mayor had mentioned, PFAS is an item that is certainly becoming more noticed in the media, in our environment. And what I'd like to share with you really is just sort of this brief summary. So PFAS, these substances, these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, there's about 26 different substances. They're everywhere. They're really ubiquitous, and the more and more we've learned about them over the last 15 to 20 years is that they can potentially pose a health risk. There's associated health risks with them. The EPA, as it relates to water, began monitoring for PFAS in 2013 under their unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. So PFAS in 2013 was an unregulated contaminant. It wasn't a contaminant that was regulated under the federal government's CERCLA regulation that says you can only pollute this much, and if you pollute more than that, you have to clean it up. It wasn't a regulated contaminant. But EPA started having water utilities take a look at it in 2013. OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, and the EPA over the last decade have established health advisory levels for drinking water utilities. And in some cases, some states have established their own maximum contaminant levels, like Minnesota. Some of the many states out east where they've had a lot of contamination associated with defense installations, those states have gone back and established some strict levels. Oregon doesn't have it. They have a health advisory level, and some of those advisory levels have evolved over time. The EPA, though, in 2023, they have promulgated a rule to regulate PFAS. I think they're poised to adopt that by September of this year. I think that's they have to adopt something by September. And they're going to adopt something that has a much lower level. They're looking at something that's around 4 parts per trillion, a very, very small, minute amount. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. That will be legally enforceable, and if we have exceedances, that would mean we have to treat that to remove it, or find a different water source. PFAS, we've seen PFAS into our monitoring wells. We've got some monitoring wells set up because of some previous industrial activities in Milwaukie. And we've gone out and taken some samples. We detected those in monitoring wells this past year. And then most recently, we have detected one of the contaminants, PFAS, in our UCMR5 sample that we recently got back yesterday.
What is UCMR?
That is the uncontaminated or unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, the 5th iteration. So EPA has gone through 5 iterations of looking at these unregulated contaminants, and the list of contaminants have changed over the different iterations. But in 2013, they did PFAS, that family of PFAS, and then this year, in 24, they're doing it again. So we did it in February, we'll have another sample in August today. What we found in the UCMR5 wells, or samples, is that we're below the Oregon Health Advisory limits. But we're going to be probably, it's above, just slightly above the new proposed EPA standards. So there's still a lot of wiggle room, I think, on where they may end up with that maximum contaminant level. A lot of cities are pushing back hard on what that limit should be, because it's a very, very low limit. But right now, if that rule was in place, we would have, our samples would be above that rule. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We are taking this seriously, and we're getting prepared for what's to come. So what are these substances? So there's synthetic chemicals that have been manufactured and used by a broad range of industries. I had some experience with this when I was back in Illinois. We had an Air Force base that was closed. The Air Force Base, Chanute Air Force Base, had been in the late 80s and very early 90s, the Department of Defense firefighting school. And one of the activities that they do there is practice putting out fires on aircraft, and they use these firefighting foams. So these firefighting foams had lots of these PFAS chemicals in there. So in Illinois, there was lots on the Air Force Base that the city was taking from the Air Force and redeveloping. There was lots of this contamination, and it was unregulated. The Air Force did not necessarily have to clean it up. As we were going through this process, there was a lot of significant groundwater contamination at levels of thousands of parts per trillion. And there was contamination in sediments in waterways, and just in the soils, lots and lots of contamination in their fire training area, on the runways, all over the place. 3 or 4 years ago, I would have, if you would have asked me, was I worried about Rantoul? Rantoul was also a groundwater utility. Was I worried about the PFAS there? I would say no, because the geology there was had a much better structure, much more protective of the aquifer that we used. However, when the samples that we took back in 2013 that would have non-detect were testing at a much higher, we were looking for a much higher level than what we would test for in the future. So it's possible that Rantoul might have the same issue with PFAS in the groundwater. One of the other areas we found it in was in the biosolids that we treated at a wastewater plant that we would then go apply to agricultural grade. So, this is how it becomes sort of ubiquitous and in the environment. So it's in the sort of the food cycle, and it's in corn and soybeans and all these sorts of things, and the cows that eat the feed. So it's all over the place. It's in Teflon, it's in Vortex clothing, it's in the microwave popcorn bag. It's a chemical. There's lots of these unregulated chemicals that we don't necessarily know what the health impacts are. And it takes time for the government to go through and figure out what they want to do with them. PFAS and PFOA were the most commonly known ones. And you can see the reasons why they were used. It's, they were resistant to high and low temperatures. They don't degrade, they don't break around, they don't break down. These compounds are really hard to break down. It's not like our volatile organic compounds that we treat for in our water that all we have to do is aerate them and they'll dissipate. These, you need a mechanism to sort of pull them out of the water and remove them. And we can talk a little bit about that. And non-stick, so it's your Teflon pan, right? So that's why they used them. Firefighting foams, electronic chrome plating. Chrome plating, we did have some industries in Milwaukie that did chrome plating. PFAS was used as a fume suppressant during chrome plating activities. And it's been detected worldwide. You go up into Greenland, you're going to find it in the ice up in Greenland now. It's persistent bioaccumulative, so it doesn't, your body doesn't get rid of it, and they're finding there's more and more associated health impacts. And as I said, there's evidence that continued exposure above certain specific levels may cause adverse health effects. The regulation. So in 2013, we looked at these 6 specific compounds. I think I said there was 26. I think there's 26 that we look at now. But those are the 6, PFAS, PFOA. And these all have long names. They all have fluorine, the element fluorine is part of it, which makes it hard to break down. We sampled in 2013. Results from that sampling in 2013 produced no detection. So when we sampled, we took samples from our upper treatment plant, the entry system into our distribution system once we've treated the water, our lower treatment plant, over by the public safety building. At the entry point, we didn't have a detection at well 6 and well 8. So four places that we took those samples, and we didn't have any detection. The minimum reporting limit at that point was between 20 to 40 parts per trillion, depending on which inlet we were looking at. And that is that smallest measure of concentration that can be reliably measured by the lab when they look at it. So we're looking at things that are 20 to 40 parts per trillion, which are really small. And now we're going to be with these new rules that are being proposed. We're looking at an order of magnitude lower. The 5th rule, I think it's 29. I'm sorry, the numbers are. We sampled in February, late February. We just got the results back yesterday. And what we found in those two, we found at our upper treatment plant and our lower treatment plant that we had detected PFAS, just the PFAS inlet, none of the other ones. In our monitoring well samples, we saw lots of the different, lots of these other ones in the monitoring well. But in our drinking water well, our drinking water samples, we just saw the PFAS. One was at 4.5 parts per trillion, and the other was at 6.3 parts per trillion.
So are you saying that the others were cleaned by the system, or they just weren't in the different
They just
well?
weren't present in that sample, in those samples that we took. We're going to take a subsequent sample as part of this monitoring role in August at those 3 sites again. But we're also going to take some other intermediate samples at our wells because we want to see what we want to see. Get some more information at the wells. OHA established these health advisory levels for the 4 PFAS compounds, PFAS, PFOA, PFNA, and then the HXS. They set that at 30 parts per trillion. And those health advisory levels are non-regulatory and don't mandate or require action. The samples that we took at our drinking water levels are below that, the health advisory level, but they are going to be above the proposed EPA rule.
Did you say that it was 4 and 6 roughly? And so the Oregon HAL is 30, but EPA is going to be lower than 4 or 6 even?
It's going to be
3 or something?
4. I've got some additional
coming up,
information, but
okay.
generally about 4 parts per trillion.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So EPA is also, so here's the other interesting thing. So EPA has also developed these health advisory levels as well. They originally started at 70 parts per trillion, and now, back in 2022, they put out some information that they wanted to set some really, really low levels for these, for several of these analytes, PFOA and PFAS. If you can see, those are 0.004 parts per trillion, which is like 4 parts per quadrillion. And 0.02 parts per trillion for PFAS. And these are non-enforceable, regulatory, but they're also below the levels that you can detect with the current methods that we use
Oh, wow.
at a lab. Dioxin is similar to these like 4 parts per quadrillion. If you calculate that out, they have limits like very, very low, like on dioxin. That it's very easy also because you're trying to detect such small, minute levels. It's very easy to contaminate the sample if you're not wearing the proper clothing. If somebody's wearing a Gore-Tex jacket, you could potentially contaminate it. So when we sample, we actually take a water sample, and then there's a field blank that's also sampled to see if there was some sort of contamination, but it's hard to sample. And last year in 2023, EPA has proposed this new drinking water regulation to set the maximum contaminant level for PFOA and PFAS at 4 parts per trillion. And then they have a little bit more complicated hazard index-based regulation for these other compounds, which basically is if you add things up, if you add them all up and it equals X, and X is the number that they don't want it to be, then you're violating it. Once again, they're not currently regulated, but once it's final, both this MCL and hazard index will be enforceable. And if exceeded, we would be responsible for installing some sort of treatment or providing some alternative source of drinking water. Generally, what happens when they promulgate these like new rules and put these burdens on communities, they will provide a compliance schedule. I haven't had it happen on the water side, but on the wastewater side, we have a phosphorus limit placed on our wastewater treatment plant, and we ended up having like a 3-year compliance schedule to add a phosphorus treatment process to our wastewater treatment plant. This one. So I would anticipate there would be some sort of compliance schedule that we would have.
I don't know why they're called Gen X chemicals, but as a member of Gen X, I'm a little offended by that.
It's because they've been forgotten for so long.
These last few chemicals, they didn't have. Why are they called Gen X? Does that have anything to do with?
Don't take it personal, Shane.
I don't know, but I can find out.
No, I'm just
I
kidding.
know.
I didn't know if that had to do with the timing of when they were discovered or.
Generation 10.
Oh, maybe it's generation 10 as opposed to X. Okay. I can live with that one.
Generation Teflon.
So one of the things we did I started back in 2022. I started working with GSI, and GSI is one of these geological firms, consulting firms, and we've used them to help us with other contaminants that we've had in our drinking water system, some of these VOCs. So they've been helpful in helping us determine how our wells are impacted by contaminated sites that are out there. And actually back in, I think, 2020, we had them do a lot of delineation to allow us to sort of look at how does the groundwater, when we're pumping our wells, how does that water flow? And what's the time, the travel time for water as we're pulling water? So they look at it like 1 through 10 years generally, and how groundwater flows. And so they did this wellhead delineation for us. And then what we did in 2022 is I asked them to take a look at what would perhaps be your susceptibility to PFAS. Because one of the things, when I think actually Mary had asked me a couple of years ago about PFAS, and I said, oh, it was non-detect, and it made me start just digging more into it. And one of the things that, looking at one of the past contaminated sites, I had noticed that they had done chrome plating, and that was like, let's take a look at what's going on here. So I had them do a susceptibility analysis, and what they did was they took a look at the wells that we have, and then they used some available information from the EPA that identifies sites that have had past industrial activities, and they identified, I think, up to 88 sites that could potentially have used PFAS at some point in terms of industrial activities, or it's possible. And then from that, they ranked like which ones they thought were more susceptible. And the one that they ranked as the most susceptible was actually well 8, which was out of H2O Avenue Service, which is out. Let's see if I can. It'll work on the TV.
Yeah.
You see City Well 8 just above the black box on the fringe, right down there. Yeah, right here, City Well 8, right down there. So that was the one that they said was the most susceptible, perhaps, because it was the closest to much more of some of the industrial areas out by off of International Way, and that areas. But then the other sites that they were looking at was like the lower treatment plant, and there's the Stanley Prototype site, the sort of McFarland, the LDM site where 7 Acres is, and then there's also the Milwaukie International Way site. And Stanley Prototypes is a site that we know has contributed to volatile organic compounds, and we're treating for that. So we took a look at one of the monitoring wells, our monitoring well for water, which is the city installed several wells back in the 90s when we started having these issues with the VOCs, to sort of see how things were flowing in the ground. So based on the information from that susceptibility analysis, we decided to take a sample of that monitoring well for last summer, and we found PFAS. We found PFAS in there, and the monitoring wells there are generally shallower than our drinking water wells. They're ranging from about 118 to 190 feet. So there was the potential perhaps of like a little bit of protectiveness or dilution. And then we took it in the summer, and we've been pumping a lot of water. We thought maybe we should wait a little bit of time and look at what it might look like in the winter, but also sample some additional wells, see if there was some seasonality to it. So over the fall, we worked on getting a contract in place, and then we took some samples in January, and at 3 wells, and we found the PFAS in those 3 wells. So here's sort of like the tracking on where I just told you in Milwaukie. So 2013, it was non-detected. We had this higher reporting limit, that's that minimum reporting limit. We did a susceptibility analysis that we wrapped up in the early part of 23. We did that sample at that well 4. That well depth's about 189 feet, and we saw results for different, for several of the different ones between, 4 to 9 parts per trillion. So here's that first sample result, sort of lined up with the 2 different health advisory levels and the different ambulance that we took. And then the retest that we did in January, and we expanded it. I think in the staff report, I think I said monitoring well 3. It's actually monitoring well 4. We repeated the sample at 4 and then 1 and 2. So here's what we saw there. And you can see in 4, we did get a lower number at 3.5, which was lower from the last year on the PFOA. So those are some of the numbers that we saw in January.
So I'm understanding this, the contaminant, the PFAS is used on the surface and then filters down, and that's what's potentially affecting groundwater over time. Is that what happens?
It can be. It can also be, poor housekeeping of chemicals when, during the time this is broken using those chemicals. So, they had spills that they didn't clean up, or they just dumped barrels outside, or, all sorts of things. But generally, sort of poor housekeeping. It's less likely that it's from, background contamination from, somebody's Gore-Tex clothing or something like that.
Right.
It's more, I would suggest it's related to some sort of past industrial activity, but it could be something else.
But just so I'm understanding, you're saying that because our monitoring wells don't go as deep as the water well, that even though you're detecting some of these chemicals, it's not necessarily that it's gotten down to the water, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the whole thing? Because you're talking about the difference in the depth of the wells, and that I think has a significance, and I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Well, the depth of the monitoring wells, we thought maybe we would see lower numbers at our drinking water wells.
Right, because they're deeper, right?
Because they're deeper.
Yes.
And what we did see is we only saw on the drinking water ones, just one of the contaminants show up in PFAS.
Okay.
And not these other ones that we see there. So this was the monitoring well samples that we did in January, as I mentioned, and we detected the presence. The majority of them the vast majority of them are above the MCL for PFOA and PFAS. There was just the one that was below that, 3.5. And then, as I mentioned, in February, we took our samples for this UCMR 5 reporting monitoring requirement. We got the samples back yesterday, and we had detected the presence of PFAS in our upper treatment 4.5, and the other one was at like 6.3. But none of these other contaminants, we didn't detect any of the other contaminants. So our next steps, I said we're basically here before I update. I didn't update this, but yeah, we did receive the results, and they were present above the proposed EPA standard, but below the OHA health advisory limit. So right now, technically, we don't really have to do anything, but we're trying to be proactive, so what we're doing is we've reached out to DEQ to talk to them about what we've seen from that contaminant level, and we're also reaching out to OHA to talk to them about what it means for our water system. We did last week submit a grant application to the state to get funding to conduct a feasibility study on how we would go about treating PFAS in our system. So Jennifer and I worked with a consultant team to put that application together and submitted that on Friday. We're looking for roughly about $150,000 study to do that work. And that will help us, I guess, inform us on what would be the most appropriate treatment mechanism for the city to use if we have to treat. If samples, if these other samples we take in August show the presence above these proposed levels, or if the EPA finalizes the rule at the levels that they have. We've also identified several projects in our CIP that relate to future treatment plant upgrades. We've got we've got several projects that are focused on those treatment upgrades, really focusing on the sort of preliminary design process for those treatment plant upgrades. So this really actually comes at a really good time as we're looking at upgrading our treatment plants to sort of, integrate this potential need to treat for PFAS, as well as making these upgrades to our facilities that are, haven't seen really some significant upgrades in, 35 years now.
Peter, are there commercially available treatment options? Are they mechanical, are they chemical? What are they?
Yeah, so generally you treat this through absorption. So a lot of the treatment techniques involve carbon, using granular activated carbon to filter the water through, and the carbon somehow pulls that PFAS contaminant out. It can be expensive because then you have to deal with these contaminated carbon, the contaminated carbon of that. You can also use an ion exchange, which is often used for water softening. So it sort of changes the charge on the electron between what you're trying to remove out, and it sort of pulls it out and brings it in. It uses sort of a resin-based ion exchange softening sort of system. The potential there is you could not only perhaps remove the PFAS, but also have a co-benefit of softening the water. Also expensive though. But there are techniques, but they're expensive. Yeah.
So would it be would those techniques be considered an upgrade from what we currently do, or would they be a whole new system to implement, or a whole new work?
They would be additive. Yeah. So we would still need to treat for VOCs, which is relatively inexpensive. It's an easy treatment process. But this would be we would have to add this process.
To what we currently do. Yeah, okay.
Peter, you may not know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. What does medical science tell us about this? Because, what is the manifestation of exposure to this? And I know that's a broad question because everything depends on, exposure and exposure length and everything like that. But what's happening to people?
Well, I think what the EPA is finding in their analysis and working with the medical professional field is that they're seeing impacts related to immune systems. They're seeing associated impacts with liver functionality. I've seen where they've mentioned there's potential cancer impacts. So it's sort of like a broad-based impact, health impact. These are really, really low limits, and I think, my sense of it, I'm probably wrong, but I think the EPA looks at like water utilities as like a place to really, through regulating contaminants there, it's easy to reduce and reduce those contaminants at a water utility as opposed to these other sources that are out there, right? Because it's sort of like a point source, right? You can control it and treat it before it goes out into the system versus all these other sources that are out there. Although they are also regulating how industries use these chemicals.
Well, that was kind of my question, is you talked about the health advisory limits, but they're not really a regulation, they're advisory. So why are they going that way? What is that saying that they're doing that as opposed to an actual threshold that you have to meet? Is that, yeah.
Well, I think the EPA put out these health advisory levels just to inform people that there is an issue. If they're above these levels, you should consider.
So that was something they could do more quickly than a formal
Yes.
regulation.
I think that that's the normal path. In other words, there's these advisories come out and they study it, narrow down, and then before they go into a regulatory regime. I think that that's not unusual.
No, but I mean, it's been 10 plus years, yeah.
It moves slow.
And they've evolved that, EPA's evolved their health advisory limit from like 70 parts per trillion to these really, really low limits that you can't even test to. And the 4 parts per trillion, even those levels are really low. And they feel like that's like the bottom threshold that you can test to right now with the same laboratory chemicals.
And what does it
Mean about, you said they focus on water systems, but what about Johnson Creek, Allen Creek? What about our creeks and the water that goes into the Willamette? Is anybody testing that? And I guess we assume you don't drink too much of that, but kids do play in it, dogs do play in it,
Well, the Clackamas River is used as a water source, right? Yeah. So I think if you're using that as your source, you're testing it to see what's in there. I did have a conversation last week with somebody from DEQ, and we were talking about our dry wells. And at one point, DEQ was considering having permittees, the UIC permittees, which is underground injection control systems of a dry well. And we have those permitted through the state, through DEQ. We have a permit for that. But during permit renewal, they were considering having municipalities sample for PFAS in dry wells and decided to hold off on that for right now. because there's just some sort of uncertainty if they should be doing that. But in some cases, I can see the point, but it'd be nice to know.
Yeah, well, what's coming off of, I mean, then that's picking up what's coming off of cars and tires and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, in the little bit of good news, I did have a conversation or an email exchange with the fire chief last year because there had been a couple of firefighting incidents where, you know, oil was going into the river and stuff. And he said their foam that they use these days does not have it. So, yeah, so that was at least a bit of good news. Yeah, go for it.
This
Go ahead.
piggybacks off the mayor's question, because I was thinking, like, are we more or less susceptible because of our water source? It's an aquifer, right? And I thought when it's been a while, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that our water source was a little different than a lot of the communities around us because of some old thing that we had, treaty or not treaty, or some sort of agreement. Is that right? Or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, Milwaukie is unique here in the region. You know, if you look at Oak Lodge and Sierra View and Portland, they're primarily surface water utilities. Milwaukee's a groundwater utility, so we get, we get our waters from wells. Portland has both surface water and wells. Generally, generally there's groundwater is generally of higher quality and cleaner and more protected than surface water, right? Just from the fact that you don't have a lot of, you don't have a lot of pollution directly going into groundwater as you would into a river, or you don't have, a lot of, animal waste and wastewater effluent going into the water. So there's it's generally more protected, but not always. It does depend on the geology. So, I think what we found here in Milwaukie is that the water's generally pretty good quality, but the aquifer itself doesn't have that sort of protective layer that protects it from contaminants that have happened over the years. So the VOCs that we treat for from past industrial activities have made their way into the system.
We are a little different the way we source our water. Okay. And then the other question, when you mentioned water softening, which some people do at their home because of the hard water that we have, is there any way that you could do this sort of, you're worried about these PFAS, and you said we're waiting too late, I want it done now, my home. Is that possible? Would a water softener help, or is that not really?
Probably not that home system.
Okay.
But I mean, it's sort of generally the same. It's the same application, but you really, when you're doing that larger scale ion exchange at a treatment facility, you're focused much more on process control and how much sort of the detention time of the water has in the resin.
Okay.
So I think probably not. It might be-
Couldn't do, okay.
But there might be a minor
Other questions from Peter?
I just want to thank Peter. He brought this up at our directors team many months ago. He's really been monitoring and following this. As we said, PFAS is everywhere, and every city's going to have to grapple with this. And I think it's really smart that we're talking about it now. We're talking about it early. We're doing early sampling and monitoring, and taking these steps to get this feasibility study going so that we're not caught flat-footed if and when the EPA rolls out those regulations. So. I think also we'll begin talking about this with the public too, so that it's not taking them by surprise. Anytime you talk about water and quality of the water, people rightfully have concerns. And so I think the transparency and the proactivity that Peter's bringing to this is really great.
Great.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Okay. have a discussion about credit cards.
Okay, card payments. We're gonna do the shuffle. I'm coming down here.
Congratulations to our new finance director.
We're putting him right to work. His reward for a good lot of work
Yes.
is more good.
Seems like the more you do, then the more you get.
Yeah.
It's called the curse of competence. Thank you. All right. Thanks for having us, Mayor and Councilors. Emma Sagor, Assistant City Manager, Acting City Manager this week, but not for a few weeks with that. We've been playing with the A a lot. And Michael Osborne, brand new Finance Director. We've been talking to you guys a lot about budget. We have a lot of dates coming up over the next couple of months to dive deeper into budget. One topic that is definitely on our minds as we do that we wanted to not wait to bring to you is payment card fees and charges, because this is an ever-growing sliver of our budget and frankly every jurisdiction in every city's budget. Let's go to the next slide, Scott, or I have it. Thank you. So when we are talking about card charges, we're really talking about any time a resident is using a card to make a payment to the city. And we take payments for all sorts of things. Just to give like kind of the 30,000 foot level, we do take checks or cash. You can pay in person or by mail for all payments, whether that's utility or court or fines or anything like that. You can pay your utility bill over the phone. And then you can pay by card really easily online for all sorts of things, for utility bills, for court charges, for building permits, business registration, tree permits, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have set up electronic funds transfers, so you can just provide your account number, your routing number, and do that as sort of that behind the scenes, just auto pay. That is currently only an option for utility bills. So big story here is just there's a lot of money flying around every day from residents of Milwaukee to the city's finances. So when we're looking at payment cards, and I use payment cards because we're really talking debit and credit. There's sometimes a little fluctuation between each of those, but there are fees associated with both. The quantity that we're looking at is about 41% of our utility billing transactions are being made by credit or debit card. Almost half of our court transactions are being put on a card. A little over a quarter of our building and permitting transactions are made by a card. And then when we're looking at just raw numbers, it dissolved FY23. So this is July 2022 to the end of June 2023. We had roughly 3,000 transactions that were over $1,000 done on a card. Roughly 1,450 over $2,000.
That's for the year?
That's for the year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And we are working to get kind of what piece of the overall pie that is, and we're doing a bit of a deeper dive that when we bring stuff to budget committee, we'll show you those numbers. So the takeaway here is a lot of transactions are being done by payment card, which I think we all know. We cards are just really becoming ubiquitous. Why do we care about that? If this is the way the economy is going and this is the way that people are doing business, isn't this just what we do? Maybe, but this graph is a little troubling to us. So this is annual bank charges incurred by the city since FY 2017. This is the line item in the finance department's budget. And you'll just see that steady growth from, in 2017, it was $75,000. For the current fiscal year, we think we're going to come very close to $250,000 that we are eating in fees. Those bank charges include merchant fees. There's a lot of complications here that was sort of put, or complexities that were detailed in the staff report. Mike will probably be the person to answer on those. But these are things that like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover are charging us, as well as charges that the bank is putting on us to process those card fees. We're kind of getting hit twice. What this graph doesn't even include is we also, through our IT budget, have a software transaction fee. So basically the software system we have to take card payments also dings us. And they're increasing that. Tyler Technology is the service provider we use for our Encode software. They last year increased the per transaction fee from $1.25 to $2 per transaction. So in this current year, we think we're gonna be spending around $86,000 just on the IT side. So the 240 plus the 86, this is a total budget hit of over $320,000. That's a big chunk. I mean, for a city our size, that's a big chunk of money. We are not alone in this. All cities are experiencing this squeeze. We have been doing some outreach to talk to others about what are you doing to counteract that, and that gets us to the next slide. So there's a few things we can consider. The first one, and I would say this is sort of the no-brainer, is to educate folks about this being, well, this is what happens. You know, there's such a convenience to just using your card, but there is a cost, and helping our taxpayers understand what that cost is. And in addition to educating folks, helping them transition to doing that EFT, that electronic fund transfer, particularly for recurring payments. If we can move those off of a credit card and onto an auto transfer, makes their life easier, saves us some money.
And does that save the Encode fee as well, or would we still get hit with the Encode?
That's a good question. Do you know if?
No, off the top of my head, I can look into that.
Yeah, we'll have to. I believe it wouldn't, because I think that's really the running of the card, but we'll check on that and get back to you. The second thing we can consider, and you've actually already done this in our last fee schedule, is lowering the limit for what we'll accept as a charge on a card. So currently in the adopted consolidated fee schedule, we say nothing over $10,000 can be put on a card. If it's over $10,000, it's going to have to be a bank transfer or a check. You could lower that. You could lower that substantially. You could go from 10,000 to 1,000. I was doing some research preparing the staff report. I believe Oregon City has maybe a limit of $500. So if it's over $500, you can't use it. So what that would do then is on those bigger purchases, particularly for building and development permits, because often those fees are a percentage, you're ensuring that we're not going to get dinged with that 3% or 5% of a $7,000 permitting charge.
And those you said amounted to about 28%?
Mm-hmm. The building.
So of those, do you have an idea of what proportion is over 1,000?
We don't, but we're looking into it.
We'll bring a deeper data dive on.
To follow up on that, when I was looking at that 28%, it surprised me that it would be lower. To me, it'd be higher.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because of this 10,000 restriction? They're just saying, well, I'm not going to put it on my card. It's going to cost me an extra 3%. Why isn't every building permit practically saying, I'm going to put this on a card?
Credit card. So it's not even that we will charge them an extra fee. We do not allow them.
We just don't even apply
If
it.
it's over 10,000.
Well, that would explain
they
maybe then
cannot-
too, the less of a
They
burden.
cannot use the card. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it'd be like a combination, so you lower, if you lowered it to 1,000, and anything over that would have to be an EFT.
But it'd be EFT or a check.
Check.
Is there a fee on the bank side for an EFT for the customers?
I'm sure there is, but it's a lot less than the credit card fee. And then you're also not paying the percentage on the credit card.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be for like a utility, it would be for somebody who's doing a development.
The third option would be you charge a fee to recoup this cost. You could do a flat, if you're going to use a card, we're going to charge a flat $5 fee or a flat 2% fee or something like that. We have, in our outreach to other cities, no one has really considered this. They're talking about this as the cost of doing business, and if you, Bonnie, our previous finance director, wrote a memo that we included as an attachment to the staff report. She wrote that back in 2018. And back then, it sounded like if council had wanted to go the fee route, you also have to seek approval from the credit card companies for the fee. It's not as simple as we just adopted our fee schedule and go. There are multiple steps there.
Well, the county does this for your property taxes.
If you pay by card.
Comcast does it now too.
I was going to say a lot of vendors do have pass on the fee in some way or another.
Yep. So, when we've been thinking through this, there's several kind of considerations that are around our mind. I mean, first on the equity side, I think that even 5 years ago, we would have probably seen a larger population that were unbanked, maybe didn't have access to cards. I do think that population is declining. But and we don't have hard data on this, but what we believe we are seeing is more folks who are living on fixed or low incomes putting bills onto cards to avoid shut-offs or late payments. They get to maintain their utility service, but they are also then incurring credit card debt. We also know that a lot of folks are who maybe do have choice are choosing to use the card because there's so many points and reward systems and benefits now that you might, even if there was an additional convenience fee, you might still choose to do that because you want those frequent flyer miles or something. And then I mentioned the neighboring jurisdictions. None of the ones we've spoken to have charged a fee. We haven't called every single one, but most of them have not. And that some have applied limits on payment card transactions. I mentioned the Oregon City example. And then I think, development is the other kind of consideration here, and we'll do a deeper dive into our building transactions to really understand when if it's always been that 28%, if that shifted a lot when we put that $10,000 cap in, and can come back with more of that data for you.
To answer the mayor's question, we do not get charged a fee from Tyler if we do EFTs.
Okay. And to be honest, isn't that the equivalent of Venmo? And we don't get charged as a Venmo user when we Venmo, so I don't think the customer gets charged either.
Well, for someone that but if you're using Venmo as a business, then there is like a goods and product charge plus tax filing and things like that. Is there, with the merchant fees, the bank fees, or the software fees, is there a scaling option, or are these flat charges?
Well, for the Tyler and Encode, it's a flat. It went from $1.25 to $2, and that's a flat fee per transaction. And then on top of that, there's a credit card fee, which is a percentage.
And the city incurs the credit card fee as well? If someone, so on that, like the ridiculousness of that would be like, let's say somebody is paying off, an outstanding balance on their utility, and that outstanding balance is $5. They're going to use a credit card perhaps, and then we're going to pay an additional $2.
Library fines is a good example of this.
How about
If somebody has a $5 library fee and they go to use their credit card to pay it, we're paying it. Say the fee or the fine is $5, we're paying a $2 charge just to use a credit card, and then a 5% increase on that. So we're only getting back a net of half, roughly $2.50.
So I think what I think you're saying, Counselor, is maybe in addition to the maximum limit, a minimum limit is something, and you do see private businesses do that as well. Minimum $5, $10, $15 to use a card so that you're not completely losing.
Or on the software, the merchant side of things, I don't know if there's monopoly or that software seems to be is it cost prohibitive to look at a different type of software that?
So we have looked at that. About a couple of years ago, there was 5 options. When they limited it down to 2. When we did an RFP last year, it was just Tyler, which is our accounting software that we use. And their reasoning is they want to make sure that their environment is as safe as possible. So they don't want to partner with outside companies in order to keep cybersecurity and all that stuff safe. So they've limited just to 1. I don't know if I buy that reasoning, but it's shrinking, and the fees are increasing at the same time.
So I think, what you're saying is the software that we chose to go on for billing systems only uses one interface,
And
the
it's their
credit
own.
card. And we did a fairly sizable investment to go with that software. So changing that would be changing a lot of stuff on the citizen
I know we've had, the county reached out to some of us too because they're in the same predicament. And when we changed to Tyler, we were kind of in the forefront for that, but we didn't have options, so we had to go to Tyler. And they made a lot of promises that it would be more streamlined and easier to use, which it might be, but you don't have a way to shop costs now.
That's a bad deal.
My earlier question around scaling, I guess I was kind of wondering, like, let's say that 5 jurisdictions in Clackamas County use this Tyler software, and combined, is there a way that we can hit a certain increased threshold level to cut a deal with the software companies so that maybe we're not hitting that threshold as Milwaukie, but if we were to partner, it's some sort of a
Partnership.
a shared partnership, but like a network that we're all using the same software. Somehow we would use some type of an interface that would allow residents from those certain cities to pay through that certain something like that. I guess what I'm wondering is, maybe we go from, 4,000 or 5,000 transactions in a fiscal year, and to combine, we can get up to 20 or 25. Would Tyler then cut us a deal on the fees?
It's a more centralized approach between the jurisdictions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if other cities are struggling with this
Right.
and are forced to, or feeling forced to use the same software, then maybe we can.
And the county too, right? You said the county too?
The county,
Yeah.
we reached out to Oregon City, CRW, Westland, Gladstone. Everybody's thinking of this problem.
I think that's definitely worth exploring and
Yeah.
kind of seeing what the strength in numbers we might have. I think what still gives me pause is that's that 86,000 of the software fees that's not even shown on this line graph. So that we still have that $250,000 challenge with just the merchant fees and the bank fees separate from the software charges.
And that's people wanting to use their credit card to get rewards. And on the other end of that, the rewards cost, and it's at the expense that we're paying for those. So it's a challenge to get people to go away from their credit cards when they receive benefits for it.
Well, but I thought when you broke it down, you were saying that it was partially the rewards points and then also partially because, sometimes people have to put things on a card to get that cost to span across multiple months. I suppose there's not really a way to identify who is who in this situation, but looking at the socioeconomic data across the city, I would say there are probably a lot of people that are using their credit cards to pay for utilities and might be paying additional fees on top of that, like an annual fee for their card, which is predatory.
Yes.
Not even giving all the rewards.
Yes.
We've talked about, with our recommendation to really lean in on support for helping people consider and move to EFT. We already are, we do a lot when it comes to our utility billing to help people out, try to work on payment plans or work on assistance to avoid shutoffs. And I think that this could be a way to kind of continue that conversation with, okay, well, so when you pay, or you're paying this on a card, could we consider putting it on an EFT set amount every month that's predictable, you can pay for rather than just, it's great, we'll take the credit card payment, we'll leave the fee, and we're also putting them in a tough spot.
Well, some merchants will, they will say, I'll think about my phone bill, and they say, you sign up for paperless billing, and we sign you up so that they can do an EFT through the bank. then they give you like a $10, a discount on the bill. I mean, there's probably a pretty good break-even point there. And, I don't know what that number is, but, there's got to be one somewhere along the line.
It's definitely something we could explore.
Well, and I guess, I don't want to undercount the number who are going for it, for the points. I know several people. I write a check for mine, but I know several people who, that's definitely what they're doing with all their bill pay. They're just mounting up the points.
Or it's
I'd rather-
harder to find a check nowadays.
I'd rather err on
The bank sends you those for free.
I'd rather err on the other side, because for the last, prior to halfway through last year, that's what we were doing. 2 years, we had to use credit card to pay for, we were behind on our water bill damn near 4 months here in Milwaukie, because how expensive it is. So, you have to juggle things sometimes, and I think there's a lot more people out there that do that. I don't want to undercut that, but I would rather our decisions be based on the former of that impact as opposed to the points and rewards impact.
One
Because
thing
that
we
is a
talked
tough
about when we were digging into these issues, there might be a mix.
I don't know back there. I didn't know you were there.
It might be a mix of setting a level both high and low, right? Monthly bills for, say, water and some of our utility bills are going to be under a certain cap or a certain level. So you're going to be able to capture those folks that need to use credit cards to pay their monthly bills. They're a little bit lower. But on a higher end, if you reduce it and have a cap, you're going to end developers coming in and paying huge permitting fees. So you're kind of just trying to narrow the sight to figure out where the levels are that kind of nick it where you need it. So there's a couple of different solutions.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Would you mind going back to the graph slide?
Of course, yeah.
So, if we're looking at 240, and even though the development transactions consist of only, what did you say, 28% of the total, or 28% of transactions?
28% of those transactions, of
Okay.
building and permitting transactions.
Is it correct to assume that those are going to be larger transactions than a utility bill, and therefore the card percentage that the transaction fee would eat up a larger portion of that $240,000?
I think that's a very fair.
So I guess what I'm looking for is kind of the next slide, right? The pie chart that says of the 240, here's the percentage of the pie that is that are the merchant fees and the banking fees for the building portion. And even though that's just 28% of those transactions, maybe it accounts for half. And if we were to make a change in that area, then maybe we would be seeing a larger cost savings than trying to,
Make a one size fits all.
Yeah.
We can definitely, and we yes, we'll absolutely get that data, kind of fill in the bottom of that line chart of what's the proportionality, and come back with that.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to see what you said there were 3,000 transactions over $1,000. So how many of those were utility payments? There could have been somebody who's, a few months behind, and, there could have been some, but if we did a $1,000 cutoff, who would that be impacting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the cutoff you cannot use the card, or you just will incur an extra fee from us to use the card?
Currently, it is you cannot use.
But couldn't we, why wouldn't we just say, you can use your card, but you're gonna pay us 3% extra, or whatever, so we recoup our costs? I hate to take away the convenience of a card for a lot of people. As Councilor Stevender had said, finding a check, like every time I see, please send us a check, I'm like, oh, really, send a check, come on. And then I gotta go to my safe, I fill out my checks, So it's like, I hate to use the option, but I do, I have my property taxes and all that, I pay extra to use a credit card at times. And I know I'm gonna have to do that, but it's.
There's also the implementation of this into the software, which we have to figure out how we go about adding in that additional fee, and the how that implicates next in the software.
Okay.
And I hear exactly where you're coming from, Counselor Emma, and I think if you were to go that route, I would explore a fee on all card transactions that can, either a percentage one that can scale rather than
Just over certain.
just over a certain
Certain value. And also, Councilor Savage point, like if we just did it, I mean, we can do it by dollar amount, but we could do it just by permits or whatever, building permits or whatever. And some things, court cost or whatever, where I think it's harder maybe for the folks to have to incur that, but they still have that option.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
Okay, good.
Sorry, go ahead.
So on these 1,000, greater than 1,000 purchases or payments, I'm trying to get my arms around that. And I can see that there might be some late residential payments, but aren't those going to all be commercial and industrial?
Most of the commercial and industrial pay by check, so they have the AP center where they're sending payment in that way.
They're just having Warren Buffett pay it.
I believe, I wasn't here, but I believe when the $10,000 limit was proposed and adopted in the last fee schedule, it was for the same discussion you're having here. That will impact that will dissuade developers and folks seeking new development from using cards. But we were not able to find much documentation about how that 10,000 was set, and that's why we think there's a lot of scale to lower that quite significantly and still target.
I don't.
I don't remember either, but that was the time when was the last discussion like 2018? And, yeah. Does,
I definitely remember Bonnie bringing that memo.
I do too.
Yeah, but I don't remember.
why we picked 10,000. Counselor, Nancy, like, when you were just saying like $1,000, because I'm thinking too, like, who pays $1,000? Even if you're behind in your water bill by 5 months, I don't know, maybe it's close to getting $1,000, but the average resident, like, I'm trying to figure out who's paying the city, other than a court cost, which maybe there's huge fines, I don't know about that. When does more than $1,000 ever crop up other than building and commercial accounts?
There's some in utility. I would say it goes to $1,500 now. If somebody's behind in their water bill 4 or 5 months or something like that, we did have the county assistant program that we were using to get people down. But before that, in COVID, I think, maybe not in COVID, but it's past dues get up to 4 to 5 months. It can be 1,000 to 1,500.
All right.
But I would be surprised if there's any over 1,500.
What about court costs? How frequent are those above 1,000?
They don't. It's a good question.
I kind of like to know from a data standpoint where these triggers are occurring, because then I can more tailor it to not affect low income.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so kind of along those lines, I had a question about utility assistance programs. So the county is also experiencing this, and the county will often provide energy assistance. Of course, we did that directly during COVID, but there are energy assistance programs where, either the county or a nonprofit would pay. Are they using credit cards or are they sending checks?
They're sending check.
Okay. Because, I feel like that's a really easy, like, let's just make a policy at that point that helps everyone to send, to set those up for.
When we were partnering with the county, they were sending a check. And we partner with St. Vincent de Paul now, and they send a check.
Okay, that's great. And I think the Houseless Service Center serves a little over 300 Milwaukie residents. Do you have an idea of, with even smaller organizations, if that becomes a barrier for them, a capacity barrier? I could reach out to a few folks.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The only one, the smallest organization that I know that we use is St. Vincent de Paul.
Okay.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing, we're gonna come up with lots of data. The good news is we're coming back to talk fee schedule on April 2nd. So by then, we can break this all down a lot more. Of those over $1,000 transactions, how many are coming from court versus building versus utilities? Of the 240K, what's the breakdown there? I think things we can explore are, in different scenarios, so if we did set that maximum limit, then what do we think, how many transactions we can be impacting and what could the savings look like there? And we can also look at minimums, and I do want to dig a little bit into the library fines. If we're seeing a lot of those library fines for $5 being put on a card, I mean, the librarians do have the discretion to waive those, and I think do that very liberally. We're revising down in our budget revenue projections. We've been way overestimated what we get in library fine revenue because we frequently are forgiving that for
And
those $5.
Brent at the library is the one that triggered me to the library fine discussion, and I think that he's talked to the librarians about it doesn't pencil out to do, if it's a couple dollars here and there. I know that people want to pay their library fines and we want to take that, but for the most economical sense, sometimes it's like, come back when you have cash, or if there's a bigger fee down the line, wait till it's at $20 or something, so they know not to take it.
Well, it's funny because the reader tells you now, if you do self-checkout, it
Yeah.
tells you what you owe. Like I used to let them accrue and I pay them when they were $15 or $20 or whatever, or I do the food for fines or whatever thing. But now it tells you every time. And so it feels like somebody's asking you for the money. And it's like, oh, okay, it's 3 1/4. You know, so I mean, I do feel like there's something in the link system that is maybe prompting people to not let it accrue up till it's a bigger amount.
I'm not an expert on this, but from what Brent's told me, when you pay into the link system, then they're going to a pool, I guess a county pool, and then, so they're taking that transaction fee, and then they're just,
Disperse it
out,
out.
based on some algorithm.
Yeah.
Books checked out or residency, or resident percentage of the.
So we're not taking that money directly as opposed to when you go and pay it
At the counter.
At the counter.
Then we're paying our Tyler tag transaction fee, and, I know, this is one of those, you peel the onion. This is $250,000 onion.
That's
It's
a
a
lot,
rotten
yeah.
onion.
Because one thing that you noted in the packet is that credit cards do enhance it reduces collection issues, so there's that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why some people will only accept a credit card,
Yeah.
because they just don't want to deal with that.
That check that doesn't work, or, with an EFT, it has to be in the account, I suppose, for that transaction to follow through, but.
No, I mean, that is definitely something, when, if we were talking about a limit or a charge that would make it more difficult for someone who's currently paying their utility bill to put it on the card, we would have to think about, what are we gonna be foregoing and.
Singapore cost, I think.
Exactly. Okay, so lots more data we're gonna bring to you. We'll bring this back with the fee schedule discussion. We'll look into the strengthened numbers with other cities, pooling with other cities to talk about some pressure on Tyler to reduce transaction costs. We'll look into this like discounting for folks who go to EFT, whether that would be something we could explore. Is there anything else?
One last thing.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Venmo, and maybe this is way outside the box or down the road, but is there a way that there's an alternative payment method that is not a debit credit card? It is a Venmo, an Apple Pay, or Google Pay, I don't know, anything. I don't know how that works, because I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Whether, and I know that a lot of businesses go to that because of they're tired of these merchant fees where they get dinged. But I don't know how hard that is to set up or to
Yeah.
make or whatever.
And with the
No idea.
cybersecurity implications.
Yeah,
that we'll talk
maybe it's
there.
way too, out there, I don't know, but.
Yep, all great questions and points. The big thing we want to do is daylight this. This is, it's a Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's the amount of money of one of our goals, right?
Oh, it is. Multiple FTE could be hired for it.
Yeah, it's not an insignificant amount of money.
Great.
Yeah.
Can we talk timeline in general? You know,
Yes.
we're coming into the larger budget
Yes.
cycle. Like, when would we be able to make a change
Yeah,
around this? And
absolutely.
then when would we start to see it affect the budget?
Sure. So on April 2nd, we're coming to you with a discussion item on the fee schedule. So that's when we'll say, here's all the proposed changes that we're making across the consolidated fee schedule, from planning fees to building fees. In terms of things like this, we might throw a few scenarios out at you. So, okay, right now your fee schedule says the $10,000 limit. We lowered that to 1, you know, here's all the backup data that we've done on that. That's a discussion period, that's not a decision point, the April 2nd. So we get a lot of feedback from you, we go back. Next time you see us, will be April 27th, the start of the budget. That's when you'll be presented with the full budget. That will be based on the proposed consolidated fee schedule. We'll then discuss that on the 27th, discuss it the following week on the 4th. Traditionally, what's happened then is when you adopt the budget on June 4th, I think, or June, whatever date that is, that early first meeting in June, you also adopt the fee schedule at that time. And then Michael, is the fee schedule active July 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So if these changes involve coding websites differently or adjusting technology, is that going to happen between June 4th and July 1st? How long of an implementation timeline is that?
That's a great question. I don't know if you can put things in the fee schedule. I'm looking at my city attorney. Can you put things in the fee schedule and say they will be effective at a later date and name that date?
I don't really answer that question. I know we have revisited
We have revisited the fee schedule between the end of the fiscal year, you know, going in August or September and said, okay, we were ready now, we've got
Yeah.
to just make this little edit to the fee
Yes.
schedule.
I can't think of a reason why you couldn't adopt a fee and then make it, you know, as of September 1st
Yeah.
on forward. I can't think of a reason on the fly right now that would be impossible, but the mayor made my point. We can revisit the fee schedule
Update the fee
and
schedule.
add, like we added the tree fees, right, you know, in the middle, so a couple of years back. So that's all within our ability.
Awesome. Okay. We'll talk to you more about these in April.
All right, see everyone at 6 o'clock then. We're adjourned from the work session.
Nice stocking MasterCard. For real.
Well, at least you know the banks are making money off of this, right?
That went up by 3 times in 5 years, or whatever it was.
Yeah, my eyes went like this.
You make it on every, on
On all
the transactions coming in, transactions coming out. You know what they're doing.